That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Hello, and welcome back to your favorite podcast, my favorite podcast. As we learned last week, Matt Ruff's favorite podcast at the intersection of faith and fear, where every week, and especially this year, we are discussing what scares us in order to find what saves us. This is the fear of God. Speaking to you right now is one of your hosts, Nathan Rouse, and typically with me is fellow co-host Reed Lackey. And guys, he was here a minute ago, but he said he needed to go stow something in his safe real quick. And I didn't know he had a safe, but you can never be too careful with your prized possessions, I suppose. But I am getting ahead of myself, and this movie did not invite much of a levitied insertion there, so we're just going to move right along with the safe comment, because here at the Fear of God we explore, we don't explain. When you try to explain the joke, it falls apart, Nathan, except for right now when I explain that you, listener, can listen to the Fear of God at your nearest podcast platform. You can watch the Fear of God on YouTube, and you can browse the Fear of God on the web at thefearofgodpodcast.com, where you'll find Reed. Hey buddy. Hey.
What's the story, Nathan Rouse? You gonna push a little girl down the well, and you
totally took my joke. You totally took my joke. It's written on here twice, and I decided I wasn't going to use it at the top because I was going to save it as one of my questions. It's like, oh, you're going to push a girl down a Lake Mungo, and you can't get up and sing, you know?
You can't get, yeah. You're not going to bury your cell phone out there. You're just going to,
Lecky. Reed Lecky. Lecky Mungo.
There it is. Lackey Mungo.
Reed Mungo. Yeah.
That's
funny. I started watching this movie and I was like, this is a very, very serious movie, but I'm really having flashbacks to The Leftovers. And
well, because The Leftovers is such a lighthearted romp.
Oh, it's just hysterical.
So it's funny. You had
poop on 16 years of marriage. Wouldn't
poop on me, Kevin. He never asked me to poop on him.
I am so ready to do battle with you.
Battle. What's interesting, I was reading, I had mentioned a couple of weeks ago, the TV, the book, where they count down the top 100. And you had mentioned that maybe, the authors there might have included The Leftovers in their top 10, or at least high up in the list. They did not, in fact, include it because, and I found out why, because there's a chapter in there called Works in Progress, and they mentioned The Leftovers there. And it's because at the time that they wrote this, they knew, like, hey, there are shows being made right now that were we publishing this book 2 years later might have made the Pantheon. So they included a chapter of current works in progress, and The Leftovers had just finished its season 2. So they mentioned it there and, heaped a bunch of praise on it. But yeah, so I thought that was interesting. Anyway, little Leftovers love.
It is interesting.
Spent a lot of time there. So there it is. But we're not there now. Do we have any business time? Do we have anything that the listeners need?
Well, Reed, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but we got a new feature over at the website.
We do.
We've got a new feature. Thank you to guest Asia Schwartzentruber for just kicking the door down and being like, "Hail Satan!" And I was like, "Whoa."
No.
That's a little much. It's Rosemary's Baby.
Wow. Oh, Lord have mercy.
You just see like the Karens out in the world being like, it is Rosemary's Baby, not Satan's baby.
All of the things
I don't know.
right
Just
now
all
that
the
are
things
going
at
on
one
in that
time.
moment.
But no, Asia, thank you for just kicking the door down on our Afterthoughts blog series. Just, you and I have been talking about this for quite some time, actually. It's just one more means of kind of engaging some of the ideas that present themselves, not just in the films we discuss, but in the discussions we have about the films we discuss, and just giving a little extra breathing room for some of those thoughts. Thank you to Asia for starting that, kicking that off. Thank you to Reed for Candle Cove. And thank you to Matt Ruff, most especially for session 9, everybody most especially, but it's a real treat to have Matt be able to contribute in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, I would say keep on the lookout for more afterthoughts that will, as best we're able, continue to be a feature of the fog, as it were. Leave an iTunes review, you know?
Yeah,
I mean,
please.
golly, you know, I guess now that we're putting out new material for you, you know, just come on. I like these guys.
Oh my gosh.
Their afterthoughts are funny. That's the business I got.
You know
do
what?
You got any business, Reed?
No. I'm good. I'm good. I really just, I kind of just at this point just want to know what you watching. What you reading? What are you listening to?
That's the bubbles coming up at Lake Mungo.
It's a bubbles. Bubbles.
Terrible.
No.
That's terrible.
No. We're gonna put that one
There's
back.
a little girl, then I will.
No. But no, seriously, what you been watching? What you been reading? What you been listening to?
I like that you said that as though I didn't think you singing the way you did to me invoked seriousness. You're like, but seriously, as though I was already on a serious track.
Yeah,
thanks to your song.
I get it. Appreciate it.
Speaking of serious, Reed, which I often am speaking of and am. I'm not that serious that often. Really. I am inside, but I don't know.
This is turning into
for
a
later.
real existential moment for you. Like,
well, I was entertaining, like sharing a work story that was funny, but whatever. It's not that important. But what have I been watching? I'll keep it to your question here. I won't deviate too far. Riri, you know what I did?
Nay. What'd you
know
do?
what I did?
What'd you do?
In a mask with only about half a dozen people, as they sang in Annie, let's go to the movies. I went to the movies.
That's awesome.
I went to the movie
actually in the theater. Wow.
In the theater.
Wow.
It was weird.
Yeah.
I
haven't broached that subject yet. I wanted to wait until I was like fully vaccinated and everything, felt a little bit more confident. But yeah, so yeah, I haven't been back to the theater.
The scenario was one of my wife's friends. What's really funny about this is my wife will indulge watching movies. Like, you know, if I'm like, hey, we should really watch this, she'll watch it. And, you know, especially if it's a thoughtful movie, we'll have conversations about it. Doesn't love like just frivolous entertainment. I took her to Age of Ultron way back when. She did not respond kindly to it, and I was like, never again. MCU later.
Wow.
Turns out she might have been right about Age of Ultron. Sorry, Ethan. But
wow.
so many.
All the shots fired. Everything, man. Nathan is just blaze of glory. Like
I'm trying to compensate for where this movie is going to go.
I get it. I'm just
so
like,
anyway. What's really funny about this is, in a general sense, like, take COVID out of the conversation. If I were to say to my wife a year ago, hey, guess what? Godzilla versus Kong is coming out. Don't you want to go? She would have been like, no. Yeah, that is not a choice I'd like to make. That is not a way I'd like to spend time or money or life. Sure. And so what I kind of love sometimes is she has this very dear friend who's a huge movie fan.
Okay.
Of which in this case, I'm not referring to me. And the friend's husband did the whole rent a theater thing. And it was just so amazing watching this. My wife, who is an incredibly generous person with her time, but it was like, it's like the number of what, if she'd have made a list of the ways she could honor this friend for the birthday, it would nowhere on it would have been like, go watch Godzilla versus Kong in the theater. Right.
In
a public space in a pandemic.
Yeah.
But she's like, I guess this is what we're doing. And so I really got to enjoy the experience of tagging along to my wife's friend's birthday experience. And our 10-year-old came, and she and I were just scarfing on movie popcorn and watching Titans pound the tar out of each other. And it was a lot of fun. The movie itself is utterly brainless, but it's fun. It makes no sense if you expect anything sensical from the narrative, but it delivers what it promises, which is giant things beating each other up.
Yeah, it's funny. I watched that film on its HBO Max release with my father-in-law. Shout out Ned. And we watched it. The ladies in our lives indulged about half of it before they just decided they were going to go to bed.
Sure.
And so he and I stayed up and just and yeah, it's just, I mean, it was,
which is funny because the first half of it is boring. It's
kind
like
of,
there's not
yeah.
a whole lot that, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, the big ocean fight,
but that's only like 2 minutes, you know, or like 3 to 5 minutes or whatever. But that's it. It's not until you really get to like, you know, I didn't realize this, you know, was like kind of a journey to the center of the earth kind of thing. But you know,
what's weird? So I've seen the Cranston Godzilla. I've seen King of Monsters. I have not seen Skull Island yet.
Oh,
that
really?
Said,
that's my favorite of the four.
That said, I watched GBK. DOJ. UE.
Oh no. Nathan is on
love,
fire.
Nothing but love for the Snyder Cut. I loved when we released that, and my post was just like, guess what? Snyder Cut.
Guess what? Snyder Cut. Y'all never see this coming.
Anyway, GBK. I've not seen Skull Island. GBK makes so little sense. I thought that it was picking up threads of Skull Island that it clearly isn't.
Well, I don't know about clearly isn't, because they mention Hollow Earth in Skull Island.
Okay. But I thought Rebecca Hall and the little girl were definitively character holdovers from Skull Island.
Oh, no, they're not.
I know that.
Okay, yeah, no,
I know.
Not,
but that's how much I thought in media res the story was. It's like, okay. I don't know who these people are, but here we go.
Yeah. The Kong stuff in GVK is very much like sort of like you just kind of like, what are they doing? I will say though, man, like honestly, of the four films, Kong Skull Island is my personal favorite. I think it's the one that sort of is the most rewarding. I like them all. I enjoy them all in sort of a different range, but it's not work for me to go back and revisit them. And honestly, like duking it out at the top, which is ironic given the Godzilla versus Kong, but is the original Bryan Cranston one, the first one, because I find that film very strong. But Kong Skull Island is my favorite of the bunch. I like it. You should give it some time sometime.
I love how my Charles Holloway, he's like, okay, I'll take a paycheck. And Godzilla Kong, he's just like, y'all gonna green screen me, right? I'm just gonna do my Chandler thing for two scenes in 5 minutes, and
that's it. Yep,
$500,000 or whatever he gets paid.
Yeah, that's all. All right,
that's what I watched. That's what I did.
Okay,
went to the theater, ate some popcorn, watched the movie.
All right. Well, okay. I know listeners are probably getting kind of sick.
Listeners,
yeah, of me. Co-host apparently as well.
I mean. At a certain point, it's like, you just like, guess what, y'all?
Yeah, I read more.
Lack of the librarians up in this mofo.
Lacking the librarian.
And we're all like, shh.
Stop talking about it. Like, geez, we get it, okay?
Go ahead.
All right. So, no. I'm going to cast aside the 7 books that I've written down as potential eventual, watch and read and listen to, whatever. And I'm going to talk about a TV show. I'm going to talk about a TV show that I've been checking out. Only reason
all 9 seasons of it since last week.
Well, the reason that I almost didn't bring it up now and maybe was going to reserve it for a later insertion is because I am not very far into it. I'm only about the first season into it. But there's a show that debuted on Canadian television and has now been brought to Netflix. At least the first 4 seasons have, called Kim's Convenience. Have you heard of this show?
We watched the first episode. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so you've seen the first episode. So the premise of it is it is a Korean family who run a convenience store. I am remiss. I've watched the first season and I can't remember where they are located. It's not in like a big metropolitan area that I'm aware of, but it's in the city. And they live above the convenience store, and it's a family-run business. The father and mother are the primary, owner-operators. The daughter helps out a lot while she's not going to school. And then their son, Jung, is estranged from them for some reasons that the show makes clear as it progresses. And what I love so much about it, there's so many things. I thought it was charming. I thought it was very, very funny. One of the things that I love about it and was worried about before I got into it was I was worried that their Koreanness was going to be the butt of most of the jokes, when in point of fact, it's not. That through much of the series, although admittedly their accent can enhance line deliveries in very comical ways, they never make the fact that they're Korean, or at least not that I've seen in the show thus far, that's never like the cheap butt of the joke. It's the comedy is still rooted in characters. It's still rooted in situational dynamics that sometimes is directly related to their Korean heritage, but not in a way that I feel like denigrates them or just uses them as a cheap punching bag. It was also really fascinating to me. This is a kind of a strange thing to bring up, but it's in you've said you've watched the first episode, that they're like, it's not overstated or ever like this big moralistic thing, but they're Christians and regular churchgoers. And that comes up throughout the season. Like there's a couple of plot lines that revolve around their church, their local church community, and, you know, opinions of people, et cetera, and stuff like that. But Kim's Convenience, which I know I shouted out for Godzilla versus Kong, but also my father-in-law directly introduced me to Kim's Convenience, because I asked him, I said, hey, I'm looking for... Yeah, and I said, I'm looking for a new fun sitcom show. And he talked about a few things, but then pretty quickly we landed on like, and he was very insistent, like, and I'm thankful for it. Like, I want to show you Kim's Convenience because I really think it's a great show, and I think you will respond very strongly to it. So we wound up watching, he showed me the first couple of episodes, and we wound up watching most of the first season while we were hanging out together. So that is what I have been watching, Kim's Convenience on Netflix.
You can't at least try Ted Lasso? I mean, you just said,
wow,
you asked
I've learned
a beloved person for input on sitcom-esque, you know, fare. Yeah. And I've been trying. I'm like,
have you seen Ted Lasso? But see, one of the biggest differences is that, like, I'm wanting to wait on Ted Lasso for reasons that I really don't feel like unpacking right now. I'm wanting to, you know, like like what I love about it is, no, Reed, don't share a book. We're tired of you sharing a book. Share a TV show instead. Okay, no problem.
That's fine. It's how you ended it with, I was in the mood for lighthearted sitcom fare, and my good friend whom I'm conversing with.
Well, since you called it out. So, no. You put the dime in. So since you called it out, I did also, and I don't think I mentioned this earlier, I did mention to my father-in-law in our conversation that I was looking for something that was multiple seasons. Now, I'm not dismissing Ted Lasso, but I did say because we had just finished
Reed's convenience to leave that out.
well, no, we had just finished watching Desperate Housewives. Desperate Housewives is like 8 seasons, and it's 23 episodes, so it was like a long haul.
That was a lot.
And you know, Kim's Convenience is nowhere near that, but I said I'm looking for something that will be a bit more of a, hey, this is going to be the comfort thing that we put on for longer periods of time. And while Ted Lasso would definitely fit that blip for like a few days, Kim's Convenience will be an ongoing thing for probably the next few weeks. So, you know, there's that. But is there anything else that I need to comfort you with, or do you just want to, you know?
I'm sorry, this movie just heavy, and I really don't want to go to Lake Mungo. But I guess that has been another awkward installment of What You Watching? What are you reading?
Not good enough for Nathan.
Can't even finish.
I just killed the song.
Listening to
one of these days. I'm not even going to text you about it. I'm just going to watch the whole
first season. Send me the Ted
season.
Lasso gif of him dancing, and I'm going to be like, and I'm going to start dancing.
Yeah, or I'm just going to, one of these days on one of these episodes, I'll just be like, have you seen Ted Lasso?
I actually thought you were going to do that sometime recently, and I was like, nope, just another book.
No, I'm so
Lackey the library.
Wow. I'm loving the way that my see, this is taking me back to my junior high school days. Four eyes reading. Like, oh, what are you doing to do, Reed?
But,
You gonna read? What are you doing, Reed?
Oh, read. Oh, it's in the name.
Reed's reading another book, huh? What's next? Cop with a donut. What's next? Like, what are you gonna?
Wow. Woo. What's really funny is you have no idea where some of my thoughts are going on this movie, and you're like feeding right into them.
That's how it goes.
So Reed, that was we did that.
That happened.
I think it
fun
was
for all involved.
Therapy, for the listeners. Like, clearly Nathan is self-conscious about how much Reed reads, and
Reed got picked on a lot for it when he was in high school.
Feels a little insecure that he's not taking his recommendation for Ted Lasso. Okay, loud and clear, team.
I love you. Let's just put it out there. Whatever comes after this, I love you.
Yes, I appreciate that. So Lake Mungo. Oh, we need to intro this.
Oh yeah, we should. Oh my gosh, I almost forgot.
Yeah,
so sorry, Hunter. So this was another installment in our ongoing series of
Daddies started fighting again, Hunter.
The kids leave the room. But
you can come back.
But this was another installment in our hashtag What Scares Us series that we're doing all through this year. We'll be pivoting over at some point to the hashtag What Saves Us, and that will probably be here before we know it. But in the meantime, we're still here, and this week's submission was given to us by listener Hunter Robinson, who it was actually something, I'll be completely peek behind the curtain confessional, is that Hunter actually submitted this relatively recently. We have other things that are programmed, but I was pretty curious to go ahead and get into this, and based on Nathan's reaction to it, maybe I'll come to regret that. But I said, like, hey, let's pull this forward and kind of talk about this now. But we also, as we have been prone to do recently, we invited Hunter to share some of his thoughts audibly with us. So we're going to give him that opportunity right now. So Hunter, share your thoughts on Lake Mungo.
One of the more recent movies that made a big impression on me and is absolutely chilling is Lake Mungo. For me, the combination of grief and terror has never been more effectively executed. It's a quiet film filled with haunting images, and it's easily my favorite faux documentary-style film. The style is used perfectly to make you feel the grief that the characters feel. For a small, low-budget movie, it is astonishing how powerful it is. No other horror movie has made me feel the way Lake Mungo does. It's a heavy movie about the tragic loss of a child, but it's an unforgettable experience that I would recommend to horror and non-horror fans.
Thank you very, very much. We are tremendously appreciated the opportunity to talk about this film, and thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on it. So yeah, Hunter recommended to us Lake Mungo. It's a film I had seen, but it was many years ago, and this was my second viewing of it. And really, the only thing I could remember about it going into this viewing was that it was a faux documentary style, like I was going to make this weird thing where I was just like, oh, maybe mockumentary is not the appropriate term. Maybe folkumentary is, but I was like, no, we're not going to do that.
No, Reed. No, we are not. I tried to cut that joke from the lineup, and you just insisted on throwing it back in there.
I just barreled right in.
Documentary. Golly.
But no, it was so back to it is like the film is set up and it never unveils any different conceit. It is like, if you watched this and we're not kind of in on the joke, it looks and feels like, not a joke, but it looks and feels very much like a documentary. That's but it's completely fictionalized. And so, like, if you did not know that it was completely fictionalized, there's nothing in the film per se that would clue you in automatically. Like, they don't pull back the curtain at any point and just sort of reveal that anything. Like, the reason I'm pointing that out is because there's another film, we're not talking about it, but there's another film called The Last Exorcism. And The Last Exorcism also has that feel of like, oh, this is a documentary that we're putting together. And by the last like third of that film, they veritably abandon the conceit and just sort of begin telling you the story, and it becomes a bit more Blair Witch Project by the end of it, where it's like, oh, now all the craziness is going on and we're just watching the narrative unfold. Whereas this, Lake Mungo specifically, even right up to its closing credits, feels very much like it's structured with the conclusion of a documentary, and like it was meant to be a documentary kind of feel to it. So that was all that I knew about it from my previous viewing of it. I wanted to know from you, and maybe this will sort of take us into it, what did you know about it, if anything, and then sort of describe the encounter of it or any sort of pre-prep work or you know, the experience of watching the film.
I knew nothing about it. And in fact, when I started it, I intentionally did not read the synopsis. To the point that I this is going to sound weird, but you know, you go to the landing page, and then in this instance, this was on Shudder. Excuse me. In this instance, this was on Shudder, and I went to the landing page and didn't read it, but you know, your eyes will just naturally catch a word or two, and I did catch foe, and so it starts and not foe, and it starts and it goes into the docu-style, but the first 10 or 15 minutes, I was like, I'm pretty sure I read the word foe there, because I was just like, this is very straight and
yes.
Leans hard into its conceit. I found it very challenging. Not challenging is the wrong word. Finding myself on its wavelength. I think partly because my subconscious, though, had registered the word foe, I didn't like lean hard there. It was more just this casual observation your brain made, but you don't put a lot of stock in. I bought in quick.
Okay. Yeah.
And because of that, kind of was really emotionally affected by the overall piece.
Yeah.
And so as a summary here, the basic premise is this family, mother, father, teen son, teen daughter. Remind me, where she disappears is not Lake Mungo. Lake Mungo is a separate like park, national park type thing.
Yes.
But where she disappears is a natural body of water, right? It's not like just a pool, right?
Yeah. It's in a lake, but I don't remember what lake it is, or it might be like a bay or something.
I'm intentionally trying to set aside all frivolity at this point, because I want to let the conversation reflect the material somewhat. And so, in summary, this family, 16-year-old daughter Alice and son Matthew, I don't remember the parents' names, Russell and
that's a good question. June. Yeah, Russell and June.
On just this swimming outing, the daughter drowns. I mean, they lose her in this outing. She does not come back to shore with them, which sets off this at least momentary missing persons case. They find her body, but the mother does not join the father to ID it, which becomes an interesting plot point later on.
Right.
And so that's the kernel of the narrative, or the inciting incident of the plot, which is in this documentary style, just this family reflecting on the loss of this teen girl, and what it becomes over the course of the film is kind of a ghost story, kind of a, you know, there's a little bit of intrigue perpetrated by the teen son, but it's all wrapped in this grief thread. And I'll state the sort of where the narrative goes, and feel free to interject or correct if you interpret it differently.
Sure.
Ultimately, so the dad IDs the body, mom doesn't go with him. This video footage starts to come up because a medium enters the narrative, because these mysterious goings on start happening. You learn the mysterious goings on are perhaps perpetrated by the brother. You just learn about this whole inner life and even active life that the daughter had that the family was unaware of. And part of which is that she kind of foresaw or had forecasted or had foreknowledge about her impending death. And in fact, one of the most, probably the scariest moment in the film,
agreed,
is a moment late in the film where they find cell phone footage of hers at Lake Mungo, where she's gone on this kind of overnight event with some peers. And this what isn't meant to be totally literal, but this doppelganger of her drowned self accosts her out of nowhere. And it is a very harrowing moment as you're watching the movie.
It's rattling.
Because what has happened is the father ID'd early on. The mother, because of these goings on, begins to question, did the father ID correctly? And so you learn, okay, well, this visage of the drowned girl is what he saw, and then subsequently what the daughter had seen as well. So anyway, long-winded way of simply saying it's a grief story about a teenager wrestling with her own mortality, her own just general human feelings and that sort of thing, and a family left to deal with her absence.
Right.
And I'm going to kick the door down a little bit here, Reed, with a question.
Okay. Yeah.
That can have, if you want it to, a bit of a light response to it, but is also meant to be a bit reflective and be as open or as not as you want. But the nature of this movie and I'm thankful to Hunter for recommending it to us, because honestly, for much of it, I was like, this is by no means traditional in terms of what we cover.
Right.
In its style. And in fact, again, the only real quote unquote scary part is that the actual like Mungo sequence.
Sure. Right.
But I think it does such a good job of, kind of hitting a deep vein in terms of its emotionality. Mm-hmm. So the question for you, and I can respond or you can jump on it if something comes to you, is Reed, you and I have known each other for a long time, but what I don't know of the Lackey life is, what were you like as a teenager? And feel the freedom to pause a beat and sort of reflect a little bit there, because Readin and I don't send each other these questions, so I know I'm putting you on your heels a little bit, but I'll speak a little bit because there's a way in which what this movie does is centers its emotional energy on that volatile time of youth and adolescence, and self-expression and attachment and connection. And was it this episode? Yeah, it was this episode when I joked about seriousness or not for me.
Oh, sure.
And
Right.
It's funny because the good news is, I would say, in a general sense, the bulk of my life, my personality, my persona, how I approach the world is a generally positive and hopeful energy. But as I matured and learned more about things like Enneagram and personality type and started to take those things seriously, as ideas and not just as corporate speak for behavior expression, and start overlaying some of that back, there's a way in which I'm a very wistful person. And a random anecdote from my teen years that is just interesting to me and sort of echoes, and honestly I hadn't thought much about, but this movie really put me in the headspace of this. So my grandmother, without too much divulgent details, one of my parents' side of the family is very maudlin, very
Mm.
kind of in a way that if you observed it writ large, you'd say this is unhealthy. Very.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
It's not even negative as in negativity. It's just the word that just came to me to finish the sentence was despairing. So the grandmother on that side of the family, when I was a teenager, my mother told me about this. And I don't remember the exact phrasing, but the essence was she referred to me as thinking I was unhappy. And this is in my teen years. So, you know.
Right.
And that always stayed with me that somebody observed that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because in a very real way, I don't know that I would have articulated that. Like if you'd really pressed me in some sort of Goodwill Hunting style moment, I don't know that I would say, no, really, Robin Williams, I'm unhappy.
Right.
But very much as part of my makeup is this wistfulness, this, you know, always looking to something else, which, you know, a negative read on that is kind of selfishness, but a lot of it is really just this weird wistfulness and angstiness that did, I mean, talk about confession. Yeah. I was not the goth kid, but I definitely had some Enya on and the lights off as a teenager. I have vivid memory of that.
Right.
And I don't mean that dirty whatsoever. I just mean like I was the moody kid who's like, let me turn on the moody Enya music and turn off the lights because that's normal and healthy. And
everything's fine.
Yeah. But I do think there are very distinct, not as in I could point to these moments in time, but I think that wistfulness has log jammed me in my life at moments that in ways I don't realize.
Yeah.
You know, like the pining prohibits the presence. I really didn't mean to be alliterative there.
Yeah, I understand that.
But I can see that source as a teenager. Anyway, I'm rambling a little bit, but really it's meant to dive into what I think this movie is actually about, and just that heaviness, and what freaks me out a little bit, if I'm perfectly frank, is just my kids starting to hit that stage and needing to be, because it's anyway, I asked you the question. I've sort of, at least in broad strokes, addressed it for myself. How would you know, what would you I meant my answer to be part of this confessional idea of like,
right, of course,
I was the carefree, looked like happy-go-lucky, but you know, had this wistful energy. What was your sort of youthfulness like?
So it's hard to articulate, because as I look back at my teenage years at 40 now, and looking back on my teen years, there's a majority of the way I look at myself that is negative. And not negative in the sense of I am down on myself, but negative in the sense of I see my own ignorance, I see my own self-righteousness, I see my own arrogance. I see things that now, to the degree that I've been, you talk about confessional, to the degree that I've had to, in my own thoughts, confront the reactions I have, like, say, to patterns I see in my son, and have had to be honest with myself that much of my frustration with those are frustrations at me looking back at my younger self. And like,
or in some cases your current self, but yes.
But that, like, you know, that really he's getting in some cases where I'm very frustrated, he's only getting about maybe 50 to 60% reaction to him, and he's getting at least 30 to 40% reaction to me looking back at myself. And so it's hard to categorize what I was like, because I do know, and like one thing that came to mind as I was thinking about the question is, I do think I was spiritual with a tremendous amount of immaturity. So I was concerned of spiritual things and reflective and philosophical, but without the life experience or the maturity of self to really wrestle with them in a productive way. So in many ways, a lot of those came off as preachiness, or maybe if there were good qualities in there, they would be to the nines in terms of like how I would manifest myself, in terms of like really being like, oh, if I'm going to have a heart-to-heart conversation about Jesus with somebody, then they're going to walk the Roman road and say the sinner's prayer by the end of it. You know, it's like that kind of like hyper sincerity, if you will. And to that degree, you know, there's still, it's not as if I've dramatically become a different person. Like there were still seeds of empathy that I think were sincere and genuine, but they were not tempered by, again, the life experience that I feel like I'm still only halfway to right now, of just, okay, well, here's what I've learned this far. Imagine how much more I will learn now from 40 to whenever I'm you know, privileged to be on this earth. And so in many ways, there's a lot of time, like I will say this, and this is probably a bit arrogant of me to say, but like I will look back on like arguments I had with my dad when I was 15 or 16. And I will look back in my mind's eye of the moment when I was arguing about it, and I will most often come away feeling, yeah, I think my younger self's conclusion was right, but dang, what an a-hole I was being. You know, like, yeah, you're saying the posture that I still hold in terms of like the opinion, but man, you're being a jerk about the way that you're going about it. And man, you're being very reductive and feeling like you're intellectually superior and all these other kinds of things that, you know, time has, it was humbling me even then, but it has humbled me now in enough ways that I at least have grown to listen to it. And I was definitely like, I wrestled myself with not chemical depression to the degree to where like I was, you know, or like clinical depression, but very much situational depression. And in that way that a 16-year-old can feel like, well, this is all there is. And so this is going to be the end of my story, period. Every devastation is just like the ultimate devastation. And so there was a lot of that going on. And maybe there was some good/creative energy coming out of that. But honestly, most of my teen years, I look back at now with profound frustration at myself and my behavior, even though perhaps ironically, some of the positions I held at the time are still positions I would champion or hold now. I just really regret a lot of the attitude that I had navigating through it. I don't know if that, you know, directly responds.
No, it's so neat and interesting and real-time learning that's happening right now, because I'll frame it perhaps a different frame for a similar question is, I watched Lake Mungo, and it produced a very specific emotional frequency. And I'm curious if a similar effect happened to you, or if you approach it differently, because what feels like just happened, and this is I'm really trying not to be reductive with the usage of this type of language. This is Enneagram type stuff, if ever it existed, personality type stuff, like how people are designed and wired. Like I asked what I intended as a sort of emotion, feelings based question, and how you engaged it was a philosophical, intellectual based response. In other words, how you view the intellectual output of teenage you and judging or not that thing. So I'm kind of that's very fascinating to me, but also curious, like, do you what I'm not trying to say is there's a right way to view this movie. I'm asking how you viewed the movie now and trying to figure out, okay, is it just my personality that took what I did from it, or do you see that in there as well? Am I making any sense?
You are making a lot of sense. I did not have the same emotional experience to Lake Mungo you did, and it did not make me think about the same things in the same way.
Interesting.
My experience was, and I'll tell you what I zoned in on. It's something that you didn't include in your synopsis, but it almost centers around my feelings in the film, is the pivot midway through the film, because the Alice has drowned. The father has identified the body, but then they begin to experience, like, okay, in video footage or photographs or something, they begin to think they see her in the background and see her visage. And then there's even a video footage where like a figure walks across the hallway and they're pretty convinced that that's her.
Mm.
But there's a pivot halfway through the film where they reveal that everything they were seeing, the photographs and the video footage, had been fabricated by her brother.
Right.
And that her brother was fabricating all of these things. And where that took me mentally in absorbing the film was, and this does play into the way I view myself as a teenager. My wife and I, not that long ago, as of this recording, probably 3-4 weeks ago, just tried to do some closet spring cleaning. Like, let's go through these shelves, let's reorganize them. And in the process, we came across a couple of photograph albums, but there were photograph albums that the albums were incomplete, and there were loose photographs that needed to sort of be inserted in there. And that process of looking back on photographs from, back in the day, it can be its own version of harrowing experience and embarrassing and all these other things. But I remember, as I was watching Lake Mungo, and it may be connected to that experience of going through some old photographs, but it made me think about the ways in which I would constantly try to write my life as I was going, but I was trying to write life for my future self, like as I was going. And in photographs we would take, I remember this very specific sensation that maybe my mother would sometimes, want, or even I would want, of like, hey, let me get a candid shot, but let me kind of stage it a little bit. And let me kind of like, I want a candid shot, but it still has to like look right, and everything. And in the ways I was kind of in real time, like writing what my future self would look back on and remember about those moments. And it was weird as I was watching Lake Mungo. And at first my impulse is to get very frustrated by the brother of like, man, you're just sitting there fabricating all this stuff. Like, you're compositing an image of your sister over this so that you can put that in their face and say like, oh, look, I think I see Alice in this photograph, when he knew he composited an image of Alice over it. He set a TV in the room with video footage of her talking so that it would reflect in the mirror, so that they would look and see like a visage in a mirror, when he knew it was a TV and a video, on there. And what that made me think about is the ways in which, as we document our life through photographs, Facebook posts, social media posts, whatever, as we document our life, the way in which we are probably not being dreadfully honest. Even in some of our more brazen moments, a lot of those are probably hiding behind fear or illusion or disillusion, that we are not really as transparent with ourselves and with the world around us as we probably think we are. And the ways in which we are manipulating ourselves. And when Matthew in the film is confronted and is bluntly told, like, why did you do it? And he doesn't know. He doesn't have a good answer. He says, he thinks he maybe did it to help his mother, or, he doesn't really have a good answer for why he's building all these fabrications. And so when I think back on that stuff, I do have a very sort of intellectual processing, and my heart is very disconnected from it, except the experience of regret and a bit of melancholy that comes with it, of just saying like, oh yeah, like I didn't. And I don't have that experience about all of my 20s and 30s. I have it very specifically about my teens, but I don't necessarily have that experience. Like in my 20s, I look back on and I'm much more affectionate for the person I was then, though there's still plenty of things I would say I didn't know and didn't understand and wish I had.
I'd like to point out, you just said, okay, my teen years and a bit of an ambivalence towards that version of you, and then expressed great affection at your 20s and 30s self. I mean, something real specific bridged that gap.
That is true.
You know,
I graduated college.
You
and
did.
so that was
You
that was
went
a big
to college.
milestone. I went to college, yeah,
And at that
you know,
college before
and I
you
moved,
graduated,
I moved across the country.
You did.
That was a big life experience.
yep.
And I did,
Yep.
but I can't really think of any. There's no real influences
Nope.
or your
no common denominator across those tales of
there's
Lackey.
not.
Yep.
Listeners,
Good
what
to
you're
know.
picking up on is that Nathan and I became friends in I think the year 2000, and so this is
2000,
and I turned 20 in the year 2000, and so really, yes, I turned 20 in 2000.
Well, I know. I'm saying
friends.
was when
Either 99 or 2000. You and I became friends, and so the rest is history, as they say.
I don't think it was 99. I think it was 2000.
See, so very, very much like
sophomore year.
It was sophomore year.
Okay. See, this is why I need you. Is you're the living document of our friendship. I'm just it felt fun. You know?
I think I liked it.
I've got warm feelings when I think about it.
Oh my gosh.
That's really fascinating. Okay, well, where would you like to go?
Well, I do think so. What's interesting about the piece writ large is, first of all, it's just a piece of film craft. It's fascinating. I do think that the ideas that it's scratching at, I think one of the most haunting things about it to me, and I don't even really know if this bleeds into specific conversation, but it's one of the most haunting things about it to me was there's an interplay at the end in the final couple of shots of the film, definitely the final sequence, where the mother, after in sort of trying to cope with the fact that her daughter is gone, there's this psychic medium person that comes into their life and is trying to influence them being through sense memory and things like that. And he takes her through this kind of hypnotism thing where I don't know if she's truly hypnotized or if he's just sort of guiding her through this dream state, where he's like, imagine that you're in the house, and she goes into the house and she imagines that Alice is there, and she sees, Alice in this space and has a reaction to it. Well, at the end of the film, a couple of things have been revealed, one of which is that Alice actually visited this same psychic medium, right. And he took her through a kind of a dream state. And the film does a really, I think, rather brilliant but rather devastating interplay, because it shows you the prior to her death and disappearance version of Alice talking to the psychic medium, and then also the psychic medium in the future is taking the mom through an extrapolation, and this is after all of the mysteries have been solved, or all of the sort of the unraveling has happened. And in it, you hear Alice, younger Alice, talk about a dream in which she is standing in the house and her mom can't see her, and her mom doesn't know that she's there. Simultaneous to that, you see the mom going through the house and realizing that Alice is not there anymore. And it juxtaposes again in a devastating but rather brilliant way how Alice will say, my mom's looking right at me, but I don't think she knows that I'm there. And then the mom is like, yeah, Alice is not here. And it cuts literally back and forth between those things. Meanwhile, interplaying these images, and one of the, getting back to the brother manipulating photographs, I think one of the most haunting masterstrokes of filmmaking is at the end of it, the brother was manipulating the photographs. So one of the main images is of the backyard, and they have a little picket fence, and he made a composite of the image of his sister above the other image so that she's standing kind of on the left of center of the frame. And that's the image that he composited. But during the closing credits, it shows that had he looked into the far right of the film, he would have seen, or far right of the camera image, he would have seen what is ostensibly really her. Right. Sitting in the, so he fabricated something while the real thing was actually in a different part of the photograph. And what that has positioned me to sort of think and maybe pose as a question is, what are we focusing on in the document of our life as we navigate through these milestones, as we navigate through these, Facebook will throw a memory at us a year later or 4 years later or whatever. As we're documenting our life, what are we putting there on purpose for the sake of missing what is really there in the periphery? That's the big existential question that sort of haunts me about this, is what are we putting in there intentionally to focus on when something else is there in the periphery that maybe we will only realize in retrospect we should have been more cognizant of. And so yeah, that's what Lake Mungo brings up in me. I know you kind of giggled with it, but I think that was just because of the weight of the question.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, what are you focusing on that you shouldn't, while missing what's in the periphery? Should.
And specific, to be a bit more specific than that, what are you planting as a focal point? Because again, keeping in mind, like, I'm zoning in on the fact that Matthew fabricated these photographs of a specter of his sister, when in many cases there was a specter of his sister in the same photograph or in the same image, but just, and this is what I think is pretty brilliant about when they reveal that, is earlier in the documentary, I'm just going to call it a documentary, even though we know it's all fiction. Earlier in the documentary, it would zone in on the part of the photograph or the part of the image that Matthew fabricated. And then at the end, it would take you to a completely different part of the same image and show you, but she's standing right here.
Right.
But she's here. And so that's what I keep thinking about, like, as I'm like staging things in my life, as if like, you know what, this is what I'm going to choose to focus on. This is what I'm choosing to plant here. And how tunnel vision just encroaches upon me. And I zone in on that one thing and miss the peripheral realities, which might be, more
something that's kind of coming to me is a slightly tilted version of what you're asking, but maybe gets at my comprehension of what you're asking. Is how are the expectations you're applying to where you see and how you see your loved ones obscuring the truth of who they are? And which I'm not actually trying to take away from your question. I'm trying to compound upon it. So feel free to rebut if you think, hey, that's not what I'm asking. I'll give a very direct anecdote here. Just tonight, our oldest kid is 12. In a general sense, we're extremely lucky that our kids have managed pandemic decently. They weren't in the middle of a ton of different milestones that would have been missed or deprived. They'd have been deprived of, other than simply just what we would call normal schooling routines. But part of that too is they're just decent students, and so we're very lucky that we don't have to like hover and helicopter over them to the point that we sometimes take this for granted. Well, my 12-year-old, in fact, the 10-year-old, they share a room, came out this evening and she's like, hey, she's in there crying about her homework. I'm like, what?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And you mentioned, Reed, the feeling of seeing in your kid you and the frustration that can cause. Well, part of that too is in answering my own question, my version of your question, the expectations you create about your loved ones that obscure who they are. Like my impulse, I'm going to be real confessional here. My impulse is to get pissed. I'm like, Dad, what?
Yeah, right. Of course.
Crying about your homework. Come on.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
This particular kid is a, this is the deep calling to deep, is the feeler. She's the big feeler. She has big feelings. She feels deeply. I'm sorry, child of mine. I can tell you where you got that from. And I'm going to be the one in a couple of years going in and be like, what do you mean the lights are off and mood music is on? Get off the floor, you weirdo. But I go in and I'm like, one, I'm thinking practically, which is Reed and I have to record in 20 minutes. My thing's more important than your emotions right now. But I know if I go in that strong of stanced I'm gonna lose, and
Yeah,
I'm gonna call you
right.
and our guest and be like, guys, I need another 30 minutes or whatever.
Yeah.
So I had to, like, my expectations of, hey kid, be whatever the hell we would say is normal, or don't get emotional about your thing. I had to go in, I had to set aside me, a lot of me,
Right.
go in and just sit with and be like, hey, what's going on? I had to set aside the desire to be like, you're making a mountain out of a molehill,
Oh my
and
gosh.
just had to say,
if I had a nickel.
I know, let's take a few steps and figure out how to climb this little molehill. And
Yeah.
it, to her credit, to both our credit, perhaps, she started climbing the hill, but it took some steps. Point being, I had to make deliberate effort to be like, I can't go in to solve a problem. Here it is. Right?
Yeah.
I can't go in to solve a problem. I need to come in and see my kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
Because we want real bad for all the set decorations to make sense. And for the version of my kid I placed in the picture to overtake the version of my kid who's over there to the side, who is really like, I'm kind of here.
Yeah.
And the ways you're conducting yourself, parent, are missing me over here. That's I'll even, for those who aren't parents, I'll take it even a step further. We do that to ourselves.
Yeah, we do.
We do it to ourselves. We buy in to the lie that certain things are equating to meaning and value. Meanwhile, the real us is trying to be like, hey, let's just, Frederick Wiener has a beautiful phrase, and it's listen to your life. Just listen to your life. It and God through it are going to speak.
Yeah. Right.
If you'll tilt your ear and not, as Matthew does in the film, put your paper dolls of things in place. Hopefully it's okay with you that these steps are just revealing themselves as we walk.
Absolutely.
But we make the road by walking. Thank you. I think that was Peterson. I'm gonna throw another author at you here, because you know what, Reed? I read too.
Oh, do you?
But because something that is baked into what we're articulating here is another impression that came to me of this is a real clunky question, and so I'm going to throw it in the air, and if it lands coherently to you, then we can run with it. But it's, how good have you gotten at believing the world, quote unquote, makes sense? And because something that did, again, talking about the frequency this movie generated in me, was just the frailty and fragility of kind of all of it.
Yeah.
And coinciding with that, I referenced this a few weeks ago, but I'm reading Gregory Boyle's book, Barking at the Choir. And I reference another one of his books, his previous book, probably about a year ago right now, Tattoos on the Heart, founded what's called Homeboy Industries. And do you know, dadgummit, I just realized there's a Homeboy bakery. So Homeboy Industries is helping gang members find vocational work and and meaning and purpose. And it's really incredible stories in these two books. But Homeboy Industries, which is the name of the kind of business enterprise, has a bunch of manifestations beyond that. Like, there's Homeboy bakeries and Homegirl bakeries.
Yeah.
Well, there's one of them in LAX. And I didn't realize that until very recently. And I was like, damn, I wish I'd known that. But in the spirit of this making sense question, there's something I wanted to share with you, because you're my dear friend and we share these things, and it's in the spirit of this. And I'm queuing off what what the movie feels like it's doing, which is saying, hey, stop trying to make everything make sense.
Yeah.
You know, because it won't, and it doesn't. And Gregory Boyle, who is this, I don't know if he's Franciscan, but he references Roar a decent amount, and just generally has this real hobbitish energy about him, which is really lovely and beautiful. And it's one small paragraph and then one sentence that really arrested me recently. He says, he's talking about just the difficulty of expectation and how much working with the people he works with you can't use traditional church metrics, and which I was about to say this, and it is a little redundant, in fact, capitalistic metrics of success for how well the people they minister to and are ministered to by them are going to achieve something in life. So this initial small paragraph, he says, some things are random and other things are meant to be in our control. So God is with me when shit happens, and God is rooting for me when I need to decide things. And I'm okay with that. I don't need God to be in charge of my life. I only need God to be at the center of it. And 2 pages later, he kind of rocked my world with one sentence, because he's talking about the tragedy the people he has buried in just doing the work that he does, and the tragedy that and how burdensome that can be. He says, I believe that God protects me from nothing, but sustains me in everything. And I just thought that was so powerful in the spirit of this idea of the world making sense, and how much how much we kick against the goads, desperate for it to.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I'm kind of running off a little bit the ideas here, but want to hear your thoughts or new ideas or whatever.
So it's something that's been on my mind, a tremendous amount, and it's something that we've talked about off pod. It has been so on my mind that I might have even introduced it recently on pod. I just can't quite remember doing so. Some friends it was either last night or the night before, as of this recording, dropped by, and these friends attend the church we used to attend, and our mutual friend was my friend Randy, who had just recently died. And at a certain point, while we were just visiting, they had literally just come to drop something off to us, and so we were all kind of standing in masks at our doorway, them kind of right outside our doorway and us just right inside of it, and just sort of catching up. And the conversation did turn to Randy, and Randy was only 58 years old. And for the entire year of his life that the cancer sort of, conspired with a number of other factors to basically just decimate his body and take him out of this world, there was a tremendous amount of people. It might be too much to call it a multitude, but maybe not. Just an absolute glut of people who were believing for his healing, who were desperate for his healing, who were praying for his healing, who were clinging to dreams and prophecies of his healing. And the conversation that sparked between myself and my wife and our friends at our doorway was one about, you talk about the world making sense, and I may need you to repeat the last thing that Boyle had written, where he's, God doesn't protect me from things, but sustains me in things. I think I'm paraphrasing a bit there, but
it's easy to find right here. I believe that God protects me from nothing, but sustains me in everything.
Yes, protects me from nothing, but sustains me in everything. And here's a statement that I made in the midst of that conversation, is that ultimately, when our faith is rooted in outcomes, or in direct response to your question, when our faith is rooted in the world making sense, it is ultimately, in my view, where I'm sitting right now, maybe very tall house of cards. And I was talking with another friend tangential to the same subject about the really scandalous thing ultimately is we have so in our faith and in our walk of life, we have so rooted ourselves in outcomes that I recently received something that was a big blessing and gift to my family, to the degree that within a global pandemic, it was very unlikely to have happened, and this blessing came about, and it was really great. No need to get into all of it right now, but when this good thing came into my life, some members of my world immediately responded with a very, very quick, see, this is because you were faithful in this, and this is because you're honoring God in this, and those kinds of things. And I received that with kindness and received it with gratitude for the sentiment that they were expressing. But then when I was talking with my wife about it, I said, to be completely candid, I reject that notion.
Sure.
I reject the notion for a number of reasons. Number one, it makes the whole thing about me when I don't really feel that way. Secondarily, it is again about this, the world has to make sense. And for the world to make sense, I need a recipe and I need a formula and I need to be able to control it. And I said to our friends when I brought this up again, I said, if I embrace that good thing came into my life because I'm doing well, what does that say for stories like Randy?
Sure.
Because Randy was to his dying breath, was a very faith-filled and faithful individual, not without his problems, not without his personal sort of difficulties, but one of the most abundantly faithful people that I know. And what does that say about his outcome in that sense? And then I made a rather bold statement. Yeah, I know. As I'm coming to find out I am going to do, apparently. But I made a rather bold statement. I said, what we don't want to admit, this is what I said to our friends, what we don't want to admit is that ultimately it doesn't matter that Daniel was set free from the lion's den. And ultimately it doesn't matter that David killed Goliath. And ultimately it doesn't matter that Esther was not rejected by the king. And ultimately it doesn't matter that the 3 Hebrew children walked out of the fiery furnace. And ultimately it doesn't matter that David's friend Jonathan died on the battlefield when he didn't deserve it. And ultimately it doesn't matter that that Stephen was stoned for a martyr and that every single one of the disciples, save John the Beloved, died a horrendous and horrific death. Ultimately, those things do not matter. What matters ultimately is the posture that we adopt when we are navigating through this crazy, wild world, knowing that there is someone above, below, around, and in the center of it all who understands far more than we ever possibly could. There's a Bob Dylan song that has been on my mind a lot, as many of his songs frequently are, but there's a Bob Dylan song called Every Grain of Sand. And the song itself has like 3 verses and 3 refrains. And
there it goes, something like this.
Yeah, a little bit. But in the song Every Grain of Sand, it's about someone wrestling with the complexities of the world and the complexities of themselves and navigating through the difficulties and trials and trying to make sense of it. And I'm pulling up the lyrics right now because I want to make sure that I'm quoting this one piece very, very deliberately because I just find it so powerful. He says towards the end, he says, I hear the ancient footsteps like the motion of the sea. And sometimes I turn and there's someone there, but other times it's only me because I'm hanging in the balance of a perfect finished plan, like every sparrow falling and like every grain of sand. And earlier in it, he says in another very I find very powerful passage, he says, I gaze into the doorway of temptation's angry flame, and every time I pass that way, I always hear my name. But onward in my journey, I come to understand that every hair is numbered, just like every grain of sand. And obviously, that's a very profound sort of like poetic sensibility. What that speaks to me in this moment and combining all of these different things is fundamentally, there's a ton of things that are not going to make sense. Getting right back to your question, there's a ton of things that are not going to make sense. Sometimes children get sick, and sometimes people die and leave us when, I mean, our friends told us that, and this this just haunts me to a bit. Our friends told us that there were people who at least momentarily outwardly expressed that they are abandoning the faith because Randy died.
Wow.
And a lot of and I'm not interested in, and I know you wouldn't be either. I'm not interested in unpacking the state of their faith before or after or anything else. Just
Sure.
something, cataclysm came, and they decided, well, I'm going to move on down the road, and I'm not going to continue to embrace, believe, or profess this thing as a result of these outcomes. And so much of where my faith sits at the moment is not outcome based, is not sense making, is not trying to stand in the moment and say, well, I put the penny in and the candy bar drops out or something. I'm
There's a
like,
penny in a candy bar.
listen,
You are an old soul, Reed. Like
bygone days. Like, really? You're gonna get a Snickers for a penny? Where are you living? Like, really? But
not where, but what era?
20s
Well, I got my pennies here.
But sincerely not trying to live in this moment where like I need everything to make sense. But to sit here and go like, I resonate so strongly with what was written there, that like God protects me from nothing but sustains me in everything.
Can I give you another tool in your belt there?
Sure, of course.
That your Randy stuff really speaks out on, and I don't know the people you're referring to, so I can speak of it generically, but that the counterpoint of the folks in the periphery walking away speaks to as well. And Boyle beat this drum in Tattoos on the Heart, and he alluded to it here as well. And he says, it would seem that the ultimate measure of health in any community might well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what folks have to carry, rather than in judging how they carry it.
Oh, wow. Right.
And
right.
What's fascinating, again, it'll sound like I'm judging the people you referenced walking away, but what's fascinating is what has transpired in our comprehension of the teachings we've received that would make it so that loss sucks. Death sucks.
Right.
Difficult deaths suck even more. By no means should those things be played down. But if anything, I only knew Randy, I met him once or twice, but I know the impact he had on you, and I knew the difficult journey of the last season.
Right.
But it feels like the takeaway here is learn, grow, mature, get wiser at watching how he carried what he had to carry. Stand in awe at how this person endured.
Yeah.
Instead of judging, oh, well, because this happened,
right,
this must not, I can't buy in on a thing. And I'm not intending to set up that dichotomy in a real specific sense. It's me looking at my child and standing in awe and saying, you are carrying this. Yeah. And it's hard for you. I can't judge you for that. I just need to enter in and shoulder with, right? Yes. I mean, that, damn, man, like, Reed, it breaks my heart so much. Just like, there aren't tactile physical tasks associated with appropriate living of faith. And I understand that. And thus it can easily slip into the theoretical, right. But it's that it's in your moment of difficulty or burden. It's me just stepping in and putting my shoulder next to you, and together us standing. Now you're still going to be a little lower than me.
I love you so much, you jackass.
Maybe that's the faith too. Is I'm taking it right off of you. You're going to be light as a feather.
Man said, you're always going to be a little lower than me. Oh, man.
But I don't want the point to be lost in my frivolity. Is simply that, I had a moment years ago at this point, because the crappy thing, Reed, is it's our own fires that are going to shape what faith looks like, if it's even going to be there. And so why that's crappy is it's all going to be theoretical until it's not.
Yeah.
And a fire I had to walk through of my own journey was realizing faith, long suffering is entering in.
Yeah, right.
And I forget it. That was in a concentrated season, but clearly I can still easily forget that truth.
Yeah.
And it's listening to our life. It's living in our life. It's cognizance, awareness, presence that we have to impose upon ourselves to remind ourselves, oh, I should be slow to anger.
Yeah, right.
I should be abounding in love, which are not theoretical crocheted pillows. It's my 12-year-old. I can either be judgmental and be like, why are you getting emotional about a math problem?
Right, of course.
Or I can say, you know what? I can condescend and I can lower to and I can partner with and together we can come out of however trivial the world considers this moment. You don't.
Yeah, right.
And if I further trivialize that, what am I teaching you?
Yeah, right.
That
Understood.
your burdens and difficulties are trivial.
Yes,
basically.
right.
Anyway,
and you using that language of entering in puts me in mind of and I'm worried that I'm gonna subvert and undermine the point by what it pinged for me. I'm gonna try my best not to, because it felt really relevant and resonant. The biggest context, or like the most immediate context, when anybody uses the word enter in, it's a very specific phrase, enter in. The very specific context that my brain, with my conditioning and the things that I've always most often heard that context uttered, is when the priests in biblical days would have to enter into the Holy of Holies.
Sure.
And in those days, it was a treacherous thing for them to do so. In fact, they had to wear bells around their robes, and they had to have a rope tied around their waist, because if you entered in and you were not blameless, you were not worthy to enter into the very presence of God, you would drop dead where you stood. And if people on the outside heard that the bells on your robe had ceased ringing, they would know to, this is dreadful to think about, they would know to pull the rope and take your corpse out of the Holy of Holies. And what it makes me think of is what a scary, scary thing it is to enter in. But there is this notion in the scripture that the moment that Jesus died and the moment that he said it is finished, simultaneous to that, that veil that was separating everything out, it ripped from top to bottom. It was a very heavy curtain that presumably, well, I say presumably, it happened. It ripped from its top to its bottom, symbolically and metaphorically, as theologians would lead us to believe, and as I agree with, giving us an open door to enter into our life with God. Therefore, like, okay, now it doesn't make it any less scary.
Right.
But the path is open to us now, and that we now enter into that space, and not knowing, as the priests didn't when they entered, if we would be okay or not, and not knowing necessarily just a moment.
No.
Because the other factor that it leads me to believe is that entering in, the element and the component that I feel like we so frequently want to focus on is, how do I make myself sustainable inside this thing that I'm entering into? In other words, the judgment of passing. I've wrestled with this a lot with my son, is if I enter into this at his level, am I doing him a disservice by enabling things that are not going to equip him for the future? In other words, if I enter into it and validate what might just be a compulsion to want to, be lazy, or a compulsion to want to not have to deal with this right now, am I then enabling or fostering sort of bad behavior? And so I keep wanting to think about sustainability, which is still formulaic. And to get back to the film, and then I know you raised your hand with a concurrent thought, because then it's like what I keep wanting to do is I keep wanting to put things into it, and I keep wanting to plant things and composite things into my moments with my son, or my moments with my wife, or my moments with my friends or my peers, or even conversations like this. I keep wanting to composite things in when there is so much mystery in the periphery that I'm not even paying attention to.
Sure.
And anyway, I wanted to finish that thought before you.
Yes, and for it, I'm grateful, and I think this is. I'm actually going to redact my usage of the phrase enter in, because actually what I mean, and it's funny, your Holy of Holies imagery is what informed me of this. Instead of enter in, I'm going to use the phrase condescend, because I think that is what we're called to. That is what we are. That is the example we are given in Christ.
Right. Right.
And I hear in you the longing to, like, I don't want to enable my kid in possibly cyclical negative behavior, or however you might have phrased that just there.
Sure. Right. Right.
But I do think, sustainability is its own question. What I'm trying to articulate, and what I think we both are in a certain proximity, for my example, it took me choosing to condescend, to come down to my kid's level.
Right. Right.
And in the spirit of what we've been talking about, to say, this all doesn't make sense.
Right.
We don't need it. You don't need it to, because I'm here with you.
Yeah.
And I can carry this with you. Now let's tackle this math problem.
Yeah. Right.
Little baby steps. You know what I mean? Like
yeah. Right.
Because sustainability comes after seeing. Right. It's like, okay, if we're tracking this sort of language that's developing, you're not a problem to be solved. You're a beloved human to be seen.
Yeah.
Especially in relation to me. And so I partner with you. I come to you because you don't know how to come to me. The priest doesn't know how to enter the Holy of Holies.
Right. Exactly.
Hear me. I'm not elevating us to particular statuses, except to say, what I was about to say, it's all metaphor. That's not what I mean. But if we're not called to be like Christ, then what the hell's the point? And so,
right.
All I'm trying to say is there's a dramatic difference between asking our children to enter our holy presence, in which they can't sustain, and us choosing to come to them and say,
yes,
these emotions you're feeling, they're real. This frustration, perhaps this is what you're describing. This acting out you're doing, I get it.
Yeah,
doesn't make sense. You're kicking against things that are true and real, which is you want a thing to make sense and it doesn't.
Right.
You want math to make sense and it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't.
But I'm here, and standing in awe at how people carry what they carry, and not judging them for how they carry it.
Right. No, absolutely.
Anyway, my worry is we haven't honored the film, but I feel like, and I sort of phrase this to you, the film is just a fascinating exercise to me. It's meant, I'm glad for this conversation, and
tremendously for myself. Yeah.
I think there's something powerful in your illustration of, what facsimile are you subbing out for the real? And how do we, because what's interesting, Reed, I actually wrote this down. You were referencing Matthew's rationale. Right. He says, it wasn't about trying to trick people, but I thought something is better than nothing.
Wow. Right. Yes.
Which on a linguistic level begets a whole branch of conversation about somethings and nothings, of like, there is a thing.
Yeah.
There's not nothing. Yeah. Now, it requires superhuman and supernatural capacity to sort of take that in.
Sure. But of course.
Instead of placing the fake version, see the real. Anyway.
No, it's absolutely. And I love, I'm not ramping up to a different talking point, because I feel like I feel like the conversation's kind of been had, but the notion of condescend is something that's really challenging to me in this moment, because of the ways in which of the not dredging up too big a thing here, but the opportunities that I had to condescend and possibly could have been more helpful, and chose instead the formula, chose instead instruction, chose instead the way you framed it was just so perfect and challenging in my mind, of choosing like, yeah, you come into my presence, and beware as you do so, whether it be with, child or with whatever else is going on, instead of, really and truly, and listeners do not know him, unless you happen to be one of our listeners who, is in proximity to me and happens to have known him. But that was one thing that Randy, while he walked this earth, was exceptionally gifted at, is just, we talked about this with our friends at the doorway. He was just exceptionally gifted at seeing people, and just at looking right at them, and maybe not knowing everything that's going on, but just seeing, and to your point, like condescending and being able to.
And I hate how much work that requires of me, but dadgummit, it is worth it, because when you can do the work and pull it off, I mean, I don't think it's hyperbole to say the world's better for it.
I agree. No, I wholeheartly agree. And I'm challenged by, wanting to do that work. And no, I mean, bringing us up into the, so unless you have more.
Can I put a fine point on the movie?
Yeah, please do.
Ties this all together.
Yeah.
Is even ignore the exercise Matthew does. The whole movie is illustrating how little the parents and the family saw her.
Yes. Yes, I mean, exactly. The big secret that she's, which not worth getting into right now, but the big secret that she's holding, and and the film opens by saying that Alice was a person with secrets and was secretive about the fact that she was carrying secrets, and that is largely baked into the narrative of the film. And so, like, honestly, if it's okay with you, I'll kind of introduce the fog meter with sort of carrying out of this. So this film, in general, and we're about to go to the fog meter, which is our very specific metric of fear and God, which is the way, our means of categorizing a film's fear and its substance. A film like this, I think one of the reasons it's so special, and it did, like, when it came out, it wound up it has since, in the 10 years since it's been released, I think it has garnered like a large number of lists of like one of the greatest horror films you've never seen or heard of, or whatever else, and it frequently shows up on those kinds of lists. But what's interesting about it is that, yes, it is an exercise, but I think that exercise, if you're on the wavelength, has some really interesting things to offer. And so I'll go ahead and lead in on the fear measurement. It's a difficult needle for me to thread, because that one moment that you talk about where she's taking a cell phone video, and suddenly her future drowned and distorted self like sort of confronts her. It's a nightmarish moment. It's very freaky and very effective. That alone, I think, would be enough to earn like a 5 or a 6 from my vote. But the rest of the film just kind of deals more in dread and sort of an unsettling, sort of disturbed nature. I'm going to give it a little bit of points for that, and that's why I'm going to land on a 7 for the fear measurement. What about for you?
Yeah, in fact, I don't know that I would have said dread as much as just, for me at least. Now, I don't know if I received it in a specific way or what, but it goes deep quick in the grief meditation. And so
yes, yeah.
That general energy paired with that scare, I'll give it a 6, because I do think I actually had the thought. I was like, this is definitely not, I didn't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. Right. And so it has a lot of, anyway. So yeah, I would go for a 6 on scares.
Okay. What would you say for the God measurement?
What's interesting is I can't tell, and I did a little bit of reading on it. I can't tell if they meant it as heavily as I received it.
Okay, I understand.
I'm going to give it an 8 because I want to give the benefit of the doubt there. But I received it as a very you know, not heavy in the sense of it weighs you down, but heavy in the sense of like serious, earnest.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's that.
Yeah. I'm gonna carry over my fear measurement. I'm gonna land at a 7 because I also feel like it's a film that kind of evokes some of those things, but it is difficult to tell how much of that was baked into the premise and idea, and how much of that just sort of unpacked. It's a film we didn't touch on a lot of like trivial bits or things like that, but it's a film that had a very specific plot line, and there are some major plot turns within the narrative of it, but the individual interior scenes were not scripted dialogue. They were improvised.
I did not know that.
Yeah, they were improvised by the actors
Wow.
who knew what they were conveying in the moment, but were largely given freedom to just sort of dialogue that out as they felt it. And there are if you know that, there are a couple of times in the watching of the film that will be apparent to you, like, oh, okay, this looks like an actor feeling their way through it, but is remarkably naturalistic. In if you don't know it, it is easy to not necessarily pick up on that. So that's why I'm giving it a 7 on the God meter, because I feel like some of what they stumbled upon, they genuinely kind of just stumbled upon. And that means that we give Lake Mungo, written and directed by Joel Anderson, a 7 out of 10 on the fog meter. But perhaps a harder question to answer is, would you recommend it?
I do. I do think there's a world where, though, if hard loss was a personal experience to you, that it could be triggering. I mean,
it could do
if I'm being real sincere, or if I'm being real honest, on its own, it's just a really interesting exercise in discussing grief in a horror with a horror patina to it. But anyway, so yeah.
Yeah. With that identical asterisk that, you know, if you are someone who has recently suffered something, you know, rather profound in terms of loss, it might be a bit too much for you. That having been said, with that asterisk aside, I highly recommend it. I think it's a fascinating exercise. You're unlikely to find another horror film like this.
Yeah,
I'm not saying another one doesn't exist.
Very fair. Yeah.
But it's different, and it's thoughtful, and you know, anybody who has ever like been really enthralled by a lengthy episode of Unsolved Mysteries might sort of find the wavelength here, you know, kind of easy to pick up on. So yeah, I do recommend Lake Mungo. I think it's a fascinating film, and yeah, fascinating in its craft and in its execution, and even may have some things to ponder and think about after the fact. So, and I really want to give a big thank you to Hunter Robinson for recommending it to us, for submitting it as his hashtag What Scares Us entry. So that is our conclusion of this installment of the What Scares Us routine. I must confess, well, first of all, thank you very, very much, Nathan, for having this conversation with me. I really, you know, tremendously appreciate it. It's given me a lot to think about. It's been one of our listeners may not have picked up on the fact that what you shared and what you unpacked was one of the more personally challenging things of, like, I'm walking away with a lot to work on in myself that I know I could be significantly better at. And I thank you for that, because that challenged me in some really direct ways. So thank you for that. And then
You're
next
welcome?
week. Yeah, no, it's a very firm. You're welcome.
Yeah.
But next week, I'm extremely excited for next week. Oh my gosh. So we had a What Scares Us
Unbelievable.
that just put Nathan and I on our heels in terms of excitement. We are extremely eager to get to do this because it totally fits, but I never would have thought that anybody would have submitted this. And so next week we're going to, I don't even know the director. I should have looked it up, but next week
that's a very meta statement, though. It's like,
that's true. That's true. We are going to be going next week to the one, the only Never-Ending Story. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it.
That's crazy.
That next week,
I'm not totally believing it's going to happen, but I'll watch it.
I sure hope so. Yeah, but no, honestly. So next week, the Never-Ending Story, that classic children's film from the 80s, is, and I think it's legitimate. Hear our conversation next week to find out, but I think it's a legitimate what scares us entry. And so, in point of fact, that is where we're going next week. I am extremely excited for it.
Yeah.
I'm just eager. I'm eager. So check that out in preparation for next week's episode. Nathan, thank you once again for everything. And as we say on every episode, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And in that spirit, we encourage you to fear nothing else and be on your way rejoicing. Everyone,
Amen.
We'll see you next week.
See you guys. See you next week. Like Mungo.